you'll know for certain by her voice that she's my sister. So Kristin Minto Snowden. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's been practicing for about 10 years. And she's been working on mental health disorders and marital trauma. And she's currently writing a book, in fact, which is an interesting topic. We're all familiar with the 12 steps, but she's actually writing a book just explaining the process of how you can change through 12 steps. And it's written specifically for people who do not identify as addicts. So a sort of general applicability of the 12 steps that we're all somewhat familiar with, at least indirectly. So today we're really not going to be talking about anything related to the law. All of us are going through some sort of trauma from this ongoing sort of COVID crisis and all of the financial and other impacts that are rippling through society. There are certain things I can do as a lawyer to give levels of certainty, like making sure people's estate plans are in order. And those things might bring small peace of mind, but I think everybody is struggling. And so I invited her to come on and talk to our friends, colleagues, and clients, and maybe offer us some explanation of what some of us might be feeling, and maybe some guidance so that we can sort of navigate our own way through these things, and maybe even learn enough to help out other people as they may be struggling. I know personally I've seen a lot of people struggle in different ways. And I know with a second shutdown, certainly lack of motivation and just outright depression, I would say, is alive and well and rampant through society. So with that introduction, I'll let Kristen take it over, and then there'll be time for questions at the end as well.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Kristen Snowden. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. And normally I do regular webinars and discussions and education around relationship crises. And I know I'm speaking to a lot of business owners or executives and professionals, so it's a little bit different crowd, but as long as you're human and as long as you're wired with normal emotional wiring, relationships are in crisis right now, because whether it's the relationships you have with your colleagues, your employees, with your family that you're going home to, when you're in a constant state of trauma, which is, I'll explain why this COVID crisis is indeed traumatizing, the crisis will also show up and manifest itself in the relationship dynamics with all the people that you encounter throughout the day. So it's really important. Sometimes the answer is as simple as to put a language to what's going on. It's like, oh, that's why I'm having a hard time focusing on, this minor task, why I can't read a book, why I'm biting off my kid's head, why every single person in front of me is very frustrating and annoying to me right now, or why, someone was just talking about why my employees are losing motivation and struggling with kind of showing up fully mentally and physically to work every day. So the goal of this webinar is to kind of talk about and put a language to what's going on. So trauma is defined as anything that catches us off guard, and something that we feel ill prepared for. So think about this COVID crisis. Think about where our life was 6-7 months ago. We were in a great economic boom. Unemployment was all-time low. Everything was going really well for the majority of us. And so this coronavirus and these quarantines and these lockdowns caught us completely off guard. Some of us have never homeschooled our children and run a business and dealt with how to get groceries without dying, basically, all in the span of a 24-hour period of time. And yet here we are now, 5-6 months into it, still trying to find our way and navigate ourselves through this. So yes, we are indeed in a trauma state because we've been completely caught off guard, and this is something that we feel ill prepared for. The other thing is our brain loves predictability. So when our brain is in the most kind of copacetic, happy state is when we're moving in a routine or in a state where things are predictable. We can figure out what's going to happen next, the schedule, how we're moving down the path, because our brain's very lazy, and we kind of like to move into autopilot. That's kind of where you drive to the same place you drive over and over again, and you forget, like, during that whole drive that you drove, and you kind of go into that zone. And that's what our brain loves. It loves to run as efficiently and with as little oxygen and as little blood supply required. But that is not the case right now. We are in a constant, unsafe, unpredictable environment that is causing our brain to have to kind of work overtime to constantly read our environment and assess how to move forward next. Trauma also happens when there's a state of immobility, helplessness, or the feeling of not being able to fix it. Because again, our brain really quickly likes to scan an environment, tell us what's going on, and say, who's the bad guy? Who's the good guy? How do I fix this? How do I make it right? How do I get out of this yucky, uncomfortable situation? And there has been no answer to that. So our brain is sitting in this limbo state, limbic system. The limbic system is the state of, like, kind of that heightened survival state where we're constantly scanning and very tense. And so that's where we're constantly in this kind of fight, flight, or freeze state, scanning the environment, looking for predictability, but finding none. And then feelings of disconnection. That's literally happening because we are literally disconnected from our loved ones, from our routines, from our life, from our old way of life. It's completely disconnected. And another way that this is traumatic is the loss of sense of time. So people who are traumatized will explain blackout periods, disassociation, or kind of feeling like when they're in a state of crying or grieving that they're going to be like this forever, and really not see any end point when they're going to feel better, move on to something better. They've lost their state of their sense of time. And I'm sure, again, as Noelle mentioned, we're going back into another lockdown. It's not looking like our kids are going back to school, and that already makes me want to cry. It is giving us this loss of sense of that we can grab onto a tangible, hopeful, like, time limit to all this. And so there's a traumatic experience from that as well. So I just kind of wanted to talk about how, knowing now that we're in this constant state of trauma, how we can kind of help, give ourselves and our brains these glimmer moments of predictability and safety. Because the real key is I focus a lot on our neurological, neurobiological systems and how they impact our coping skills, our rage, our communication, our shutting down, our physical health, our physiological health. It's all neurobiological. And so I like to think of ways that, despite our environment being very crisis filled constantly, the ways that we can give our body little rests and moments despite all that. So we can kind of move on to the next day and do the next best thing and make the next best choice. So 4 things that are important to help people feel safe and make your brains feel safe is context, control, choice, and connection. So a better understanding of what's going on, context, control, so a sense of some kind of control, choice, so feeling like you have some kind of choice in the matter, and connecting with other human beings. We're neurobiologically wired to want to connect with people and not go it alone. Wherever you can bring those 4 things into your daily life, you'll be practicing healthier coping skills. What you should be trying to do is to avoid, or I should say, fight to stay conscious. So meaning, our brain will get so overwhelmed with this information and everything that's going on, we'll have a really hard time listening to conversations. We'll have a really hard time. We'll read the same sentence 13 times because our brain is kind of telling us, oh no, you need to figure out how you're going to eat and how you're going to stay safe and what your next decision is going to be. You don't have time to think about this next sentence. So that's that limbic system telling you that. Don't pay attention to the executive things, which are maybe the things that your employees are struggling with or you're struggling with. So you have to remember that these are 2 very separate, different parts of your brain. This is the part that's completely involuntary, runs on very little blood supply and oxygen, and it is in service of one main thing, which is to just keep you alive. It's meant to just act without thinking and just act. this is your executive functioning. This is what has allowed you to graduate from graduate programs and get your licensing and run a healthy business and engage with other humans. This is the part that thinks about long-term consequences, social engagement. You have to use a lot more oxygen and blood flow and purposeful behaviors to turn this on. So if you are looking at an email and you're realizing you are not like paying attention, or you can't retain information, or you're noticing your employees or those around you are struggling with that, you have to make extra purposeful choices to kind of bring extra oxygen, blood supply, and a state of predictability and safety to this executive functioning to turn it on. So sometimes that can be as simple as like staying curious. Gosh, why am I thinking this way? What kind of information did I recently get that's making me more anxious or having a hard time focusing? Sometimes that's asking your kids that, right? Because we might see our kids or employees be a little berserko and unable to focus. That's a technical clinical term, by the way, berserko. And you need to kind of ask them, get them curious. What's going on for you today? Why are you struggling extra? What do you need? Do you need to go do exercise, yoga, deep breathing, listening to music? I have a whole long list of kind of things that are evidence-based in helping you calm down your neurobiology, even in a state of crises. Singing, playing instruments, playing sports, talk therapy. I don't know a therapist right now who is not extremely busy, because people are seeking out talk therapy through these crises. Sometimes medication is helpful, like an antidepressant or anti-anxiety. That's a whole other, world. Talk to trusted people, try to see people face to face, because there's actually a healing co-regulation that occurs when you see people and you see a smile or you laugh. Those all help kind of release chemicals that make you feel safer and better. Getting outside, anything that has mind-body connection, like dance, movement, yoga, doing meditation, mindfulness, progressive scanning. If you can get massages, some people can't get physical contact, hugging, kissing people who you are able to hug and kiss with. These are all things that help down-regulate our very heightened regulation system. And so let me think, what else is, try your best not to numb. So this is a time where our body, our brain is so exhausted, its heightened regulation system wants to down-regulate so badly. So try not to numb out by obvious things like substance abuse, food, online shopping. With your kids, you might find it's hard. I know, right? Me too. I have a lot of clients too. Like,
this is a new jacket I am wearing.
Right. There's also a lot less. I work a lot in addiction, including sex addiction, and so porn use is pretty high. I think there's a lot of kind of pre-affairs or current affairs happening right now, because it's just trying to seek out feel-good chemistry in a not feel-good state right now. And I'd encourage you not to do that, because obviously you'll regret it later, if not, in that moment. Remember,
I have a question about,
yeah.
So, for people who are trying to keep some sort of daily routine and tap into their normal state of being, which is, like you said, the executive function, are there certain things we can do in the morning to try and get out of that limbic state? Or is it just little breaks with all of those things you've listed constantly to bring us back? I'm just wondering if people are trying to refocus or redirect themselves so that they can carry forward, what they can do just to kind of train their brain.
Right. We're already in a distracted world, right? So before COVID hit, we had lots of stimulation and lots of activities and lots of, phones dinging and TVs on and email coming in. So we were already like a species that struggled with narrowly focusing in. But now with news information and texting, bad news and trying to pay attention where your kids are going to go to school, that's sucking more of your kind of ability to focus in. So I'd say, yeah, start off in the morning. The basic things you can do, listen, hear this, the basic things you can do, go back to basic hygiene. Eat well. Try not to abuse substances. Sleep. enough, because then you don't wake up already with scarcity, right? You don't wake up with a brain that's already not had the right kind of food and then not enough rest, and then try to work in whatever your mojo is, right? For some people, it's sitting and petting their cat. For some people, it's, doing a run in the morning. For some people, it's sitting outside in meditation. I can't tell you specific guidance if this will work for you, Noelle. It's more like it's a muscle, and you have to try different recipes to figure out what works for you. But for sure, it'll take something in the morning, but many times throughout the day, if you really connect and pay attention to your body and listen to what it's telling you. Did you have another question? Or
No, I mean, yeah, I think that, again, when it comes to just the uncertainty of this, everybody's trying and hold on to something that is consistent in their life. And that may bring some peace. So I don't know if creating a COVID routine,
right,
or attacking projects, or, sort of focusing on silver linings, like, hey, I'm going to clean out the junk drawer for the first time in 5 years. If that stuff is helpful, it's small, but I'm wondering, at least, does it give you a sense of accomplishment that might help give you some pride as to what the circumstance is, rather than depressed about not having your regular life?
Right. The answer is most often, sometimes, right? So if tackling projects, if I'm a type A person and I get value and worth from that, that's exactly what I need. If I'm more of an introverted, quiet person, then maybe it's hiking in the nature, connecting with nature. So that's what I'm trying to say is I can't give a particular trauma treatment or a plan of action, because all of us are wired very differently, and a brain will respond very differently to different various coping skills. And what you might need might be different than what your employees need, which will be different than what your spouse needs, which will be different than what your kids need. So it's playing with all of that.
Well, I know we wanted to specifically, especially because we're a smaller group today, sort of see if other people have questions too. I mean, you're free to type them into the chat if you don't want to speak or unmute yourself. I know that everybody's kind of looking at this from a different angle, from just lack of direction to depression to, I'm hanging on, but now with the second round, maybe I'm not able to hang on much longer. But if anybody has specific questions, I know, Kristen, you have a second kind of piece, but
yeah.
If anybody has questions at this juncture, we could stop, or you can keep going, and then we can have questions at the end.
Yeah. And while you're doing that, I'm going to say the two big things that I want you to hang on to this. So I guess if you walk away from this, remember these two things. I guess three things. A, remember your body is responding to this environment right now in a state of trauma. So you're not just in that normal kind of walking peaceful in nature connected state. You're walking around in a constant hyper alert state of trauma. And so your body and your brain are not going to function up to the par as if you felt fully safe and connected and everything is okay. So remember that. And then also remember every other human being right now is also walking through this world. And so it'll help to kind of remember that and be a little bit more compassionate and empathic, that when you're watching people walk out of the store with 6 rolls of toilet paper and you're like, geez, how selfish are you? You could be like, wow, that person must be really scared right now. And that's the thing that they're grabbing hold of right now to bring some certainty and control where they feel like there is none. And so remember that when you're operating and working with your colleagues, your employees, your family, your spouse, your kids, that we're all in a state where we're extremely uncomfortable. And so the other two things are, because of that, you need to remember that you have to be extremely explicit in everything that you're doing right now. We humans sucked at mind reading before this happened, and we'll be even more horrible at reading your mind now. So everything has to be said over again, restated. And that's just because, again, our executive functioning, it takes a lot more time and energy right now to get back online. And so do not underestimate the needs to say things over and over and over again. And again, we're not just talking about with your kids, we're talking about with people you're working with right now or your spouse. And the other thing is the number one way to get your brain into that executive function, because it's going to trigger more blood flow and oxygen, and this is also for you to apply it to other people, is to stay in a state of curiosity. So as long as you're asking questions about why are you feeling this way? What's going on? Where do I feel it in my body? What do I think is caused this? What's the story that I'm telling myself right now that might be causing this state? That keeps you with some of this executive functioning turned on, and you're not going to be acting 100% out of this kind of fight, flight, or freeze, survival lizard brain, whatever you want to call it. So those are some of the main points I want you to walk away with. And that's, remember that for management, and remember that for being at home.
Yeah, I think it's good advice to just be compassionate, because everybody is struggling right now, and it's easy for us to fly off the handle in a work situation with coworkers or with family at a time when we should, sort of put ourselves in their shoes, perhaps. I know I've got a couple of questions. So one question is whether there's particular recommendations or advice for people who are watching the news 24/7 and are so paranoid about everything. Someone's asking on behalf of her elderly parents that, continue to do this. So do you have any specific advice for those who are sort of in that vicious news cycle of pretty much all bad?
The big question therapists always ask when I get asked these questions of, should I do this or should I not do it? I always say, how's it working for you? So are they spun up? Are they constantly paranoid? Are they completely isolating from other people? Are they suffering major negative consequences because of this particular behavior? If the answer is yes, then it's not working for them, and they should maybe start thinking of some alternatives. I personally, and again, I can't speak for other people, but I find a high correlation between the more news that I watch, the more stressed I get, the more short I am with my children and my spouse. So it's not working for me. I want to know enough to be in the know and know what's going on, but then I need to put my damn phone down and shut it down and operate life to the best of my ability in that moment. And that's what I've concluded for myself, but I'm not you.
Yeah, I know from a personal perspective, for me, when we were in full lockdown and not coming into the office at all, doing everything remotely, I watched a lot more news than probably ever, barring maybe just the weeks after September 11th. I remember being in a similar what's going to happen next kind of a crisis. And then when I went back to work, I stopped watching news, except for every couple days, I would just check in on the numbers, and just being in my regular life at the office and not being in that trauma, sort of what's next and the other shoes.
Super vigilant.
Yeah, and it really made a difference for me to tune out. So, okay, another comment is I'm normally pretty extroverted, but I've been working from home since the beginning of March, and I'm finding I'm becoming more introverted, and that I really that I do not really want to communicate that much. Should I be worried? The news question is great, she thought as well, which I know we're all kind of trying to stay away from. It's that accident you can't turn away from, right, on the freeway. It's like you can't help but watch. But yeah, that's a good question about becoming introvert, just kind of pulling away from people.
Right. So I feel like that's very similar to me at this point. I'm also a very extroverted person, but I feel so overwhelmed by just figuring out what to do with my 3 kids, running my business, that by the end of the day to join, I know some friends at one point were doing happy hours together where they'd all get online, or I'd regularly be talking to the women that I share private practice with. And I found myself saying no to them. But so because I do so much research on trauma, and, I work a lot in addiction recovery, and so much about addiction recovery is that we basically have sought out alcohol or porn or all these other unhealthy, overeating habits, overspending, to replace human connection and human regulation. We are neurobiologically wired to actually be able to downregulate each other. So if Noelle and I were in a deep talk about our kids or something, and you measured our heart rates, our heart rates would probably start matching. And then if you pulled our stress hormones would probably start matching as well. And not just because we're sisters, but it's because there is an actual physiological, neurobiological, emotional thing that happens when you are in a space with someone who can bring a level of safety and predictability with you. So that's the emphasis, right? We all, just like we can up or down regulate somebody for good or bad, we can do it for evil as well. Like we can use our powers for good or evil to co-regulate somebody else. So with that information, I've tried to push myself through my desire to kind of shut down, not talk to anybody, and remind myself that your body's wired to want to see people's eyes, to see their faces, to hear them laugh, for you to tell a story, for you to experience life with witnesses and companionship through the process. And so, yeah, isolation's not usually good.
But it sounds like if everybody's feeding off of each other, maybe avoiding people who are in full-on panic mode is also good advice to the extent possible.
Right. So if I'm going to other humans, in theory, to feel human again and to kind of get those feel-good hormones that happen when you're in connection with other people, again, I need to ask myself, how's this working for me? When I get off the phone with so-and-so, am I all dysregulated and frustrated and angry and thinking, oh my gosh? Or am I like, oh, I'm really glad I did that. Like that was a really funny story that so-and-so said to me. So how's it serving you? What's working?
Okay, do we have any other questions from the audience? You can type it in the chat or you're free to take yourself off mute. It looks like no, just a comment saying that's super helpful since people usually rely on her for support. It makes sense to step back. But yeah, I understand. We do all need connection. We start to feel the lack of connection.
Right.
And then, Jody has an interesting question, which is, how does that work when you are the leader in a situation, right? So she's asking specifically if you're the one who people are looking to. Then what should you be doing and how are their, I guess, attitudes going to be impacting you, and how should you be trying to impact their attitudes?
Right. So I'm also a certified Darian Way facilitator, which means I've done like a very in-depth training program with Brene Brown. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but her kind of claim to fame is she's really great at explaining and helping you understand how shame, vulnerability, and connection with other humans kind of just plays into all of our behaviors and choices. We're living in a vulnerable, difficult time. And if we are considered, so one of you is talking about, oh, usually people rely on me to be the leader, to be the support system, to kind of be the one that can help everyone navigate through this. But I'm struggling and I'm suffering. How do I show up for people? But actually, what's interesting, because I'm a therapist, so obviously a part of me when I originally got into this field was that I want to help support, stand up, lead people through struggles. But the thing that I quickly learned is compassion is not, compassion and empathy and being with someone in a state of struggle and vulnerability is not one person who knows more and kind of informs the other, like, this is how you do it. You wake up every day, you go for a run, you do. Compassion, empathy, and leadership and management is also where two people can just kind of sit in a state of struggle and tolerate it. And some of the most powerful things can happen when there's just a witness to your vulnerability and to your struggle. So a lot of, I was talking to someone who's a business owner and saying, I've held out, not laying off people, but at one point soon, if things keep happening this way, I might have to consider laying people off or cutting salaries, whatever. And I mean, a lot of my business owners are saying that to me. How do I do that? And I think one of the most important things to do is to state to anyone who's asking, hey, we know these are uncertain times. I am doing my absolute best. If you have any questions, come to me, ask me, and I will answer them to the best of my ability and be as transparent as possible. So meaning that you own the vulnerability that you don't know all the answers, you don't know where this is headed, but your goal is not to manipulate or keep secrets or keep anyone, out in the dark. And there are professional boundaries, but you're going to try to share with your colleagues and people and coworkers and employees like information as you get it. So that's kind of my best is so for, let's say if you're supposed to be the leader and support, it's that it doesn't mean that you need to be the higher functioning of all these people. It can also mean that you can be honest with the fact that you're struggling today, and you can just sit with them and just be like, yeah, there's no answer to this. This effing sucks. And like, my heart's broken right now with where the world is. And you guys can just be there together.
Yeah, there is an amazing movie called What Dreams May Come, which was, for me, just a really profound lesson in that walking side by side with someone when you don't have the ability to fix things, but just to sort of get to where they are and be by their side. And if you've never watched it, it's probably 20 years old. It's a Robin Williams. It's a fantastic movie. It's a big movie, but we have nothing but time these days. So we've got one last question, and this is interesting. We do special needs trust, and we deal a lot with children that have special needs and challenges. And somebody's asking, are there any particular recommendations or advice in helping an autistic child? I believe the same would apply for a young child or someone who just doesn't have the emotional understanding. How can we help people like that, understand what's happening in the world and cope? Because their world has been turned upside down too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'd say that is the equivalent to asking, how do you inform and connect with and help children understand it, right? Because a person who's special needs or identifies on the autistic spectrum, there can be very high functioning, where they have language and some level of understanding. And there's people that are autistic that are much more on the different side of the spectrum. So that's the same question you'd ask of, what do I tell my 3-year-old versus what do I tell my 13-year-old? Only you, who knows them best as maybe like a parent or a close family member, can see the best thing you can do, whether or not the world is falling apart, is to help them physiologically stay connected to whatever their experience is. So sometimes kids don't know their emotions because they don't have it, like the executive functioning is not fully developed yet. So for a long time, parents actually, who hopefully have fully functioning executive functions, that's not usually the case, but hopefully, you're supposed to be their executive functioning. So you're supposed to be their source of co-regulation, down-regulation, up-regulation, because they can't do it for themselves yet because that part of their brain is not fully developed. So sometimes you have to take that step further to kind of explain what might be going on. It looks like you're really scared right now. It looks like you're really angry. Mom has to do this, or dad has to do this, or no, you can't play on the play gym right now because it's just not safe for everyone right now. So it's a lot of kind of you using your super ninja intuitive skills to figure out what their body language is telling you that's happening, and help use your higher functioning skills to get them connected to that. And then the other thing is to have them start learning their own self-regulation skills of playing with the toys or running around or doing something that they find, holding a blanket, hugging things. When you push down on your chest, you release levels of oxytocin. That's the natural hugging drug. And that's the drug that helps you feel like everything's going to be okay. So sometimes it might be, do you need a hug? And things like that are kind of, if you keep it in your toolbox, that can help.
Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, this was meant to just be some helpful tips and things that we can work on little by little, day by day. I know I sort of have some mental notes of some things I'm going to try since we're not out of the woods yet, it would appear. Um, we're getting some thank yous in the chat. I appreciate everybody taking their afternoon and just kind of checking out and giving some time and attention to themselves and their own needs. That's promising in and of itself, right? And Kristen, Minto Snowden, her contact information is all at the very top of the chat. And Kristen, I don't know if you want to maybe just plug it in one more time in case they've sort of lost it. I think it should be there if you scroll all the way to the top. Otherwise, you're always free to email me, and it looks like it was just posted again. So we appreciate you coming on, and these are broadly applicable skills. So I really appreciate it and needed it.
Yeah, and I have a YouTube channel. You can find me on kristinsnowden.com. I have a YouTube channel under that same name, and I just kind of do webinars like this where I kind of talk about healthy coping skills in spite of crisis, relationship struggles, etc. So feel free to check it out.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.